The Dominion had studied humanity for years before making their decision. They had reviewed the historical records of Earth's wars, the primitive weapons, the political dysfunction, the centuries of conflict over small strips of land. They had observed the planet's defenses and found them laughably inadequate against a civilization capable of bending space-time. They had run the calculations and concluded that the conquest would take, at most, a single afternoon. They had never once considered that humanity might have been lying. Kale had understood something early in his career that most military strategists missed. The most powerful weapon in any conflict is not the weapon your enemy can see. It is a weapon they don't know exists. For 11 years, he had overseen Project Threshold, the largest and most secretive military construction program in human history. Ships built in the dark, weapons tested in the silence of the outer system, technologies developed and then locked away, shown to no one, kept off every record that might be intercepted. The Dominion thought they were coming to destroy a frightened planet. They were walking into the most elaborate trap ever constructed. The Dominion fleet entered the solar system with the calm confidence of executioners arriving at Welk. Their formation was extraordinary to observe. Thousands of warships moving in concentric rings, the heaviest vessels at the core, carriers flanking in layered groups, destroyer screens radiating outward like the spines of some vast creature. It was a formation built for overwhelming force, designed to announce that resistance was not just futile but absurd. Their sensors swept ahead continuously. They were looking for defense platforms, orbital weapons, any sign of a human military response. They found nothing. Earth sat before them, blue and small and silent, looking precisely as vulnerable as they had expected. No fleet rose to meet them. No perimeter opened fire. The planet simply waited, as all conquered worlds eventually did. The Dominion High Commander, a figure who had overseen the subjugation of 14 civilizations and had never once lost a campaign, studied his tactical display and allowed himself the quiet satisfaction of a professional who finds his expectation confirmed. "Advance," he said. "Standard suppression protocol." The first wave crossed the orbit of Mars, and then the universe changed. It happened without warning, without build-up, without the dramatic prelude that the Dominion had always associated with desperate last stands. One moment, space around the advancing fleet was empty. The next, it was not. Massive warships unfolded from stealth fields that had been holding them invisible for weeks. Enormous black vessels, angular and brutal, designed not for beauty but for function. Rail-gun cannons extended from their hulls with mechanical certainty. Carrier bays yawned open, and from those bays, like a dark tide reversing itself, thousands upon thousands of autonomous combat drones launched into space simultaneously, spreading outward in a pattern that the Dominion targeting system struggled to process. Sensor alarms screamed across every bridge in the invading fleet. New contacts. How many? The High Commander demanded. His tactical officer stared at the numbers cascading across his display. He read them twice. His voice, when he answered, was barely audible. "Thousands, so." The human fleet did not charge. It did not rush forward with the reckless energy of a civilization fighting for its survival. It moved slowly, deliberately, with the measured patience of something that had already decided how this would end. The warships took their positions with geometric precision, forming a vast encircling structure that the Dominion commanders were only beginning to understand when Admiral Kale finally gave the order they had been waiting for. Fire. The first human volley rewrote the battlefield in seconds. Streams of solid metal rounds traveling at a significant fraction of the speed of light hit the front ranks of the Dominion fleet before their point defense systems could fully calculate the trajectories. Simultaneously, directed energy weapons, beam weapons the Dominion had no intelligence on, had never seen use, had not known existed, cut through hull plating that had been designed to withstand the most powerful weapons in the known galaxy. Dozens of Dominion warships simply came apart, not damaged, not crippled, dissolved, their structures failing catastrophically under impacts they had not been built to survive. The explosions were silent in the vacuum, beautiful and terrible, brief stars blooming and dying in the dark. Shock rippled through the Dominion fleet faster than the debris, but the High Commander had not reached his position by panicking. He issued new orders immediately. The heavy cruisers pushed forward. The carriers began launching their own fighter wings. The formation adapted, as it had adapted on 14 other worlds, and the commanders told themselves that this was simply an unexpected variable, costly, yes, but manageable. They did not know that Kale had anticipated this adaptation. He had not targeted the Dominion's strongest ships. He had targeted their nervous system. From behind the main engagement, small human destroyers that had positioned themselves weeks earlier with the stealth precision of deep-sea predators locked onto Dominion command vessels and communication hubs. Railgun rounds, impossibly precise at these distances, found their marks. Command ships went dark one after another, not explosively, but quietly, their bridges losing power, their commanders suddenly cut off from a network that coordinated the entire fleet. Without coordination, the Dominion's greatest strength, its size, became its greatest vulnerability. Ships received contradictory orders. Some advanced, others held. Some fired into confusion and struck their own vessels. The elegant formation that had crossed the solar system in perfect silence began to crack, to splinter, to dissolve into thousands of individual ships making individual decisions with incomplete information. That was when the drones found them. Millions of them. Small enough to be nearly invisible to sensors calibrated for warship-scale threats, fast enough to close distances before point defense system could properly respond. They moved like a storm of dark water, flowing around obstacles, separating to target different systems on individual ships, overwhelming defenses simply through number and relentlessness. They did not destroy cleanly. They dismantled. An engine here, a weapons system there, a communications array, a navigation computer. They reduced warships to drifting debris methodically, deliberately, with a patience that felt almost personal. Within the first hour, over 2,000 Dominion ships had been destroyed or permanently disabled. For the first time in their recorded history, Dominion officers felt something they had no proper word for, because they had never needed one. Fear. They had conquered star systems. They had reduced civilizations to silence and memory. No world had ever done anything but break before them. And yet here was this small blue planet, this unremarkable world at the edge of a minor star system, and it was not breaking. It was not even bending. Earth was not defending. Earth was hunting. Close the outer ring, Kale said quietly. Human warships that had been holding their positions at the system's edge began to move, slowly, unhurriedly, like a hand closing into a fist. The movement was so gradual that the Dominion commanders, consumed by the chaos of the battle, did not recognize what was happening until the geometry of their situation became undeniable. They were surrounded. They had entered the solar system easily. They could not leave it. Somewhere in the years of preparation that humanity had spent building its hidden fleet, engineers had quietly deployed another project throughout the outer system, gravity mines, fields of invisible technology seeded through the space the Dominion would have to cross to reach warp capability. The fields didn't destroy. They distorted, bending local space-time in ways that made faster-than-light travel a catastrophic proposition. Any ship attempting to jump to warp inside the field would tear itself apart along the dimensional seam. Several Dominion captains, in their desperation, tried anyway. Their ships vanished in silent blossoms of white light and did not reappear. The High Commander stared at his dwindling tactical display and understood, for the first time in his career, that he had not come to conquer Earth. He had come to be destroyed by it. But he was not ready to accept that conclusion. He gathered his remaining heavy ships, still hundreds, still formidable, into a tight defensive formation and drove it toward what appeared to be a gap in the human line. A weakness. A way out. Kale watched it happen. Let them think they have a path, he said to no one in particular. The human fleet shifted, deliberately, opening the gap just slightly wider. The Dominion took the bait with a desperate certainty of something that has no choice. Hundreds of their largest remaining ships poured through the opening, firing everything they had, pouring energy and ammunition into the corridor like water through a breach, believing that on the other side was survival. Then the battle platforms revealed themselves. Hidden in the darkness beyond the apparent gap, positioned there weeks before the Dominion arrived, powered down to near-invisible thermal signatures, enormous human installations came online. They were not ships. They were platforms, stationary, massive, dedicated entirely to a single purpose, a battery of rail cannons larger than any weapon that had ever been deployed in human history. They fired in sequence. Mathematically perfect timing, each shot calculated to arrive at its target in coordination with the others, leaving no window between impact for shield to recycle or hulls to stabilize. The corridor became a kill zone. Dominion battleships broke apart. Carriers split along their lengths. The debris of the once magnificent armada filled the space between Earth and Mars like a field of dark flowers, tumbling slowly in the silence. When the guns finally fell quiet, Kale looked at the numbers. From 9,900 ships, 17 remained. The 17 survivors gathered near the edge of the system like wounded animals, engines failing, shields burned away to nothing, weapons depleted or destroyed. They clustered together instinctively, though there was nothing any of them could do for the others. They simply could not bear to be alone in the wreckage of what had been the greatest fleet their civilization had ever assembled. The High Commander sat in his damaged command chair and stared at a tactical display that no longer resembled anything he recognized. The red signals that had once filled the screen, 9,900 signals, each representing a ship, each representing a crew, each representing the certainty of victory, had been reduced to 17 faint pulses at the edge of the solar system. He said nothing for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was the voice of a man whose entire understanding of the universe had just been revised. "No planet can do this," he whispered. But Earth was not simply a planet. It was something else, something the Dominion's intelligence had entirely failed to understand. A civilization that had spent its entire history at war with itself, that had never gone more than a few generations without conflict, had developed something that peaceful civilizations never needed and therefore never built, an absolute, bone-deep understanding of how war worked, how it was won, how it was ended. Humanity had bled for that knowledge across millennia, and it had never forgotten a single lesson. Human ships surrounded the 17 survivors in a loose ring, close enough to make their presence undeniable, far enough to allow the moment its proper weight. They did not raise weapons. They did not accelerate. They simply maintained their positions, patient and steady, and waited. Admiral Kale opened a direct channel. On the Dominion bridge, screens flickered to life. A human officer appeared, not in triumph, not in fury, not with the burning eyes of someone who had just won the greatest military victory in his civilization's history. Kale looked exactly as he had at the beginning of the battle, calm, quiet, and entirely certain. "You may leave," he said. The High Commander was silent for a moment that stretched like a wire pulled too tight. "Leave?" he finally asked, as though the word had come from a language he didn't speak. "Return home," Kale said. "Return to your council. Tell your leaders what you found here." He paused, and something shifted slightly in his expression. Not warmth, not contempt, but something more complicated than either. "We did not start this war. We did not want it. But you came to erase us, and we think it's important that someone in your civilization understands what that decision costs." He closed the channel. The 17 Dominion ships powered their damaged engines with the careful, almost tentative movements of people who couldn't quite believe they were being allowed to leave. No weapons tracked them. No final volley announced itself. Humanity simply watched as the survivors turned toward open space and began their long, broken journey home. As the ships moved away, their crews looked back through whatever viewports remained intact. The blue planet sat behind them, exactly as it had when they arrived, peaceful, unhurried, glowing against the black with a light that seemed almost gentle. There was no visible damage to its surface, no burning cities, no sign that the civilization below had been afraid. They had come to end the world. The world had ended them instead. The 17 ships did not enter Dominion space triumphantly. They did not broadcast their return. They drifted through the capital system's outer markers with a slow, damaged movement of vessels that had barely held themselves together across light years, and the citizens who watched them arrive were struck first by their number, 17, when 9,900 had departed, and then by their condition, and then by a silence so profound that it felt like a physical weight descending on every platform, every station, every ship in the system. "Where's the fleet?" people asked. No one on those 17 ships could bring themselves to answer. The High Council assembled in their grand chamber, a space designed to project the authority and permanence of Dominion civilization, its walls carved with the names of conquered worlds, its floors bearing the seals of subjugated species. They gathered expecting a report of Earth's destruction. They received something else entirely, a transmission, not from the returning survivors. From Earth, Admiral Kale appeared on their screens. He stood in the same command room where he had spent the battle, and his posture was the same as it had been throughout, straight, unhurried, carrying neither pride nor apology. Behind him, The room was quiet. When he spoke, his voice filled the silence of the High Council's chamber with a quality that none of them had ever heard in a transmission from a defeated world, the absolute, unperformed confidence of someone stating facts. "We did not start this war," he said, "but we finished it." The image shifted. The Council watched what their fleet had met in the solar system. Not a curated highlight, not a propaganda piece. The full tactical record, unedited, showing what 9,900 ships had encountered and what had remained of them. They watched their great fleet break apart piece by piece, watched formations that had never failed to dissolve into chaos, watched the darkness between the planets filled with the debris of the most powerful armada their civilization had ever built. Kale's voice continued over the footage, steady and even. "You sent 9,900 ships to erase us. 17 returned. Let them remind you of what happens when you threaten humanity, not because we want you to fear us, but because we want you to understand us. We are not what you calculated. We are not what your intelligence suggested. We are a people who have survived everything that the universe and our own natures could throw at us, and that survival has made us something your mortals did not account for." He paused. When he continued, his voice carried something that the council members would spend a long time afterward trying to name. Not a threat, not a boast. Something closer to a truth offered plainly. "We will not come for you. We have no interest in conquest, no hunger for your systems, no desire to add your worlds to a list. But if you come for us again, what happened here will seem like the opening chapter of something much longer. We are patient people, and we are very good at finishing what others start." The transmission ended. The chamber was silent for a long time. The Dominion changed their laws. It was not announced dramatically. There was no ceremony, no acknowledgement of what the change represented. The Council simply, quietly, revised their classification of humanity. Where Earth had been listed as a conquest target, Category 7, estimated resistance minimal. The entry was updated. The new classification was one the Dominion had used only twice before in their entire history, reserved for civilizations whose power or nature placed them categorically beyond the calculations of standard military doctrine. Untouchable. The story moved through the galaxy the way important truths always move, not through official channels, but through the conversations of traders, explorers, diplomats, and soldiers who had heard it from someone who had heard it from someone else. It grew in the telling, as all great stories do, but the core of it remained unchanged because the core of it was simple and stark and required no embellishment. 9,900 ships entered the human system. 17 came home. In council halls across dozens of star systems, the name of Earth began to carry a different weight. Military analysts studied the engagement and produced reports they circulated carefully, each one arriving at conclusions that unsettled whatever assumptions their authors had brought to the work. Diplomatic dispatches from species who had never interacted with humanity began arriving at Earth's orbital stations, cautious, formal, almost careful in their phrasing, as though the writers were aware they were addressing something they didn't fully understand and were determined not to offend it. What no one outside Earth entirely grasped, what the records of the battle could show but not explain, was the aspect of humanity that Admiral Kale had understood from the beginning, and that had made everything else possible. They had let the Dominion go, not because they were merciful in the soft sense of the word, not because they were incapable of finishing what they had started, not because they lacked the weapons or the will or the capacity for the final, absolute answer. They had let 17 ships go because Kale had understood something that the Dominion, in all their centuries of conquest, had never learned. The most devastating thing you can do to an enemy is let them carry your message home themselves. Let them be the proof. Let them sit in their damaged ships with the weight of what they'd witnessed and deliver it in person to the people who had sent them. A dead fleet teaches nothing. 17 traumatized survivors, returning to face their council with the footage of what they had seen, that changes civilizations. Years passed. The solar system returned to its ordinary rhythms. Cities rebuilt what little had been damaged in the panic of that first night. Markets recovered. Children were born who had never known a world that feared the dark between the stars. Life, which had always found its way through worse things than this, continued. But out in the galaxy, in the quiet of 1,000 council chambers and the conversations of 1,000 species, the name of the small blue world near the unremarkable yellow star was spoken differently than it once had been. Not with fear exactly, or not with fear alone, but with a particular careful respect that any thinking creature gives to something it has recognized as genuinely, profoundly other than what it expected. Earth did not seek war. Every civilization that had studied the record understood this. But if war came to Earth's door, something waited behind that door that the universe had not encountered before, the full, patient, terrifying weight of a species that had been forging itself in conflict since before it could write its own name. A species that had survived its own worst impulses, its own capacity for self-destruction, its own darkness, and come through all of it not broken but refined, not exhausted but ready. Ready and waiting, and very, very good at finishing things. Somewhere in the Dominion's revised records, in the quiet notation beneath humanity's new classification, an analyst had added a single line that had not been officially approved but had not been removed either. It had simply persisted, passed from one record update to the next, because everyone who reviewed it found they lacked the argument to take it out. It read, "Do not confuse patience for weakness. They are not the same. We learned this. The cost of the lesson was 9,883 ships. Do not make us learn it again." It began with a single red dot. The Deep Space Radar Station orbiting near Jupiter had monitored the void for 11 years without detecting anything extraordinary. Asteroids, solar winds, the occasional comet drifting too close to the gas giant's pool, routine data for routine nights. But on this particular night, the AI monitoring system flagged something it had never seen before, and for a fraction of a second, even the machine seemed uncertain whether to believe its own senses. One red signal appeared on the display, then 10, then hundreds. The screen filled so rapidly that the system staggered, its processing cores struggling to map what the sensors were feeding it. The AI ran its diagnostics 3 times in quick succession, each check more urgent than the last. There was no malfunction, no corrupted data, no solar interference. 9,900 warships. They moved through the dark with terrifying precision, not the chaotic scatter of a natural phenomenon, not the loose formation of an exploratory fleet, but the tight, mechanical perfection of an army that had done this before. Thousands of times, on thousands of worlds. Each vessel held its exact position relative to the others, separated by distances so consistent they could only have been calculated to the decimal point. No hesitation, no deviation, no mercy in the mathematics of their movement. They were all heading toward the same place. Earth! Within minutes, the signal had bounced across every major communication relay between Jupiter and the inner planets. Astronomers confirmed it. Military satellites confirmed it. From the lunar observatories, telescopes swung toward the outer system and found the darkness itself moving, a black tide rolling silently between the stars, blotting them out one by one like a hand passing over a candle flame. The Galactic Dominion had made its decision. Humanity was to be erased. Panic does not arrive politely. It does not knock. It does not announce itself. It tears through cities away, storms tear through coastlines, sudden, indiscriminate, and absolute. Within the hour, emergency sirens were wailing across every major city on Earth. Streets that had been filled with evening traffic became rivers of running people. Families abandoned dinners on kitchen tables, grabbing children, grabbing nothing, grabbing each other. Financial markets collapsed in under 4 minutes, not gradually, not with a slow erosion of bad news, but all at once, as if every investor on the planet reached the same conclusion at the same moment. Money had become meaningless. Social media filled with prayers and goodbyes. Video calls connected parents to children across continents. Old arguments were forgiven in tearful seconds. People who had not spoken in years found themselves calling those numbers they had kept but never dialed. This is the end. 1 billion people whispered in 100 different languages. But inside Earth Defense Command, buried 3 kilometers beneath the Swiss Alps, there was no screaming, no running, no one clutching their loved ones or updating their final messages. There was only Admiral Kale. He stood at the center of the command room, a wide, circular space ring with holographic displays and staffed by officers who had trained their entire careers for exactly this night. The room hummed with activity, but it was controlled activity, precise and deliberate, like the inside of a clock. Every person there had a role. Every system had a purpose. Everything had been rehearsed. Kale himself stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the central display where thousands of red lights moved like a slow tide toward the inner system. His face was unreadable. He had looked older than his years for a long time, not because life had worn him down, but because he had been carrying the weight of this moment for over a decade, and that kind of weight either breaks a person or hollows out all unnecessary things, leaving only what is essential. "Confirm the count," he said. His voice was quiet. It always was. The senior tactical officer looked up from her station. "Confirmed, Admiral. 9,900 warships. Traveling in tight formation. Estimated arrival at Earth orbit, 14 hours. The room fell silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then Kale gave a single order, spoken no louder than a man asking for coffee. "Wake the fleet." Deep beneath Earth's oceans, in trenches that no civilian vessel had ever mapped, enormous blast doors began to slide open. The pressure of kilometers of dark water pushed against them, but the hydraulics were built to hold, and they held. Lights flickered on inside massive underwater hangars. Reactor cores that had sat dormant for months surged to life, their power readings climbing from silence to thunderous output in under 60 seconds. In mountain bunkers across 5 continents, the same thing happened. Floors vibrated. Lights blazed. Machinery that had been kept in careful suspension began to warm, to hum, to breathe. And far beyond the moon, in the absolute blackness of deep space, in regions of the solar system that appeared on no civilian star chart, empty space itself seemed to shiver. Reality bent slightly at the edges, the way air bends above hot asphalt. Then it settled, and the shimmering stopped, and the darkness was unchanged. But it was not empty anymore.